You are making more money today than you were 5 years ago. For a lot of you watching, that is a mathematical fact. You got the promotion, you changed jobs, you built your skills, and your income went up. If I had told the 5 years ago version of you what you are earning right now, they probably would have thought, wow, we are going to be so rich. We are going to have so much breathing room. But sitting here today, you might be looking at your bank account and feeling a very quiet, very uncomfortable sense of confusion. Because despite earning more than ever, you do not feel like you are moving forward financially. You might be stuck hovering around $20,000 to $40,000 in savings, a number that just refuses to grow no matter what you do. Or maybe you are saving, but at the exact same slow pace you were when you made half your current salary. You are not alone in this. It is one of the most common, deeply frustrating financial plateaus a person can hit, and it is rarely talked about because from the outside, you look like you are doing great. My name is Tom, and I spend way too much time thinking about the psychology behind our money decisions. If you're someone who is earning a good living, but constantly feels like your money just vanishes into thin air every month, consider subscribing if this video helps. Here's what is actually happening. We tend to think of financial progress as a straight line upward, directly tied to our income. We assume that if we make more, we will automatically save more. But human psychology does not work like a spreadsheet. When your income goes up, a subtle, almost invisible psychological shift happens. You start to experience lifestyle creep. Now, lifestyle creep is a term that gets thrown around a lot in personal finance, usually by people wagging their fingers at you for buying a nice coffee. But I want to look at this differently. Because lifestyle creep is rarely about greed. It is almost always about a totally natural human desire for comfort, reward, and status. When you work hard for 40 hours or 50 hours a week and you finally get that raise, your brain wants a chemical payoff. You want to feel the result of your hard work. And in our modern society, the easiest way to feel successful is to buy something that successful people buy. You upgrade your car. You move to an apartment with nicer countertops. You stop looking at prices on the right side of the menu when you go out to eat. None of these decisions feel reckless in the moment. In fact, they feel completely justified. You tell yourself, I can afford this now. But this is where we run into a massive structural problem with how we view increasing income. Let's break this down with a real example. Imagine a scenario where someone is earning $60,000 a year. They're doing their best, keeping their expenses relatively low, and they manage to save 10% of their income, which is $6,000 a year. It is tight, but they are disciplined. Now, let's say they work hard, get a promotion, and suddenly their income jumps to $90,000 a year. That is a $30,000 increase. In theory, if they kept their exact same lifestyle, they could be saving massive amounts of money. But that is not what usually happens. First, taxes take a bite out of that raise. So that $30,000 increase might actually only be $20,000 in new take-home pay. Then the psychological licensing kicks in. They think, I am making $90,000 now. I shouldn't be driving a 10-year-old car with a rattling dashboard. So they trade it in and take on a new car payment of $500 a month. That is $6,000 a year gone. Then they decide they are tired of their cramped apartment, so they upgrade to a nicer place. Rent goes up by $600 a month. That is another $7.2 thousand a year gone. Add in a few more dinners out, a slightly nicer gym membership, a couple of new subscription services, and suddenly that entire $20,000 of extra take-home pay has been completely absorbed by their new baseline lifestyle. They are making $90,000, but they are still only saving the same $6,000 a year they were when they made $60,000. Their income went up by 50%, but their wealth building capacity stayed exactly the same. And if we project this out over 5 years, the impact is staggering. If they had taken just half of that $20,000 take-home raise, let's say $10,000 a year, and added it to their original $6,000 of savings, they would be saving $16,000 annually. Over 5 years, just putting that cash in a basic high-yield account, they would have over $80,000 saved. Instead, because they let their fixed costs expand to perfectly match their new income, they only have $30,000 after 5 years. They spent $50,000 of potential wealth on a slightly quieter car cabin and marginally nicer kitchen cabinets. And more importantly, they are now trapped. Because once you get used to a $90,000 lifestyle, stepping backwards feels like a massive failure. This introduces a concept called loss aversion. Psychologically, the pain of losing something we already have is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something new. Once you adapt to the nicer apartment and the better car, giving them up feels incredibly painful. You have anchored your identity to your new spending level. This is why you hear about people making $250,000 a year who are living paycheck to paycheck and are utterly terrified of losing their jobs. Their income ceiling went up, but they built their lifestyle floor right up against it. They have no financial margin. And this brings me to a piece of common financial advice that I actually think is quite dangerous. You hear people say all the time, just focus on increasing your income. You cannot budget your way to wealth. While it is absolutely true that increasing your income is the most powerful lever you have, increasing your income without simultaneously building a defense mechanism against lifestyle creep is a recipe for high-stress, high-income poverty. If your burn rate scales perfectly with your earn rate, you will never be wealthy, no matter how much you make. You will just be running on a faster, more expensive treadmill. So how do we fix this? How do we actually build a defense mechanism that works in the real world without feeling like we are completely depriving ourselves of the fruits of our labor? This is where the 72-hour rule comes in. It is my personal secret weapon against both impulse buys and the slow, insidious creep of lifestyle inflation. The rule itself is incredibly simple to understand, but very challenging to implement at first. Whenever you feel the urge to make a non-essential purchase over a certain dollar amount, you force yourself to wait exactly 72 hours before completing the transaction. For some people, that threshold might be $50. For others, it might be $200. You have to pick a number that represents a meaningful chunk of your discretionary income. Now, a lot of people think this is just a cooling off period to stop you from buying a pair of shoes you saw on Instagram at midnight. And it does work for that. But that is just the surface level. The real power of the 72-hour rule is that it acts as a circuit breaker for mental accounting and opportunity cost blindness. Most people do not realize this, but when we see something we want to buy, our brain gets flooded with dopamine just from the anticipation of owning it. We get tunnel vision. We stop seeing the money as a flexible tool that could be used for 100 different things, and we start seeing it only as a token to acquire that specific item. This is opportunity cost blindness. When you force a 72-hour pause, you allow the initial dopamine spike to fade. You shift your brain from the emotional, impulsive system to the logical, calculating system. And during those 3 days, you have to ask yourself two very specific questions. First, does this purchase align with my actual long-term goals, or is it just satisfying a short-term craving for novelty? And second, what else could this money be doing for me? Let's look at another scenario to see how this plays out with bigger numbers, because impulse buys are not always small. Sometimes they are massive structural decisions dressed up as logical choices. Let's say someone is earning $120,000 a year. They are doing well. Their old car starts needing some repairs, nothing catastrophic, maybe $1,000 worth of work. But they are frustrated. They walk into a dealership just to look, and suddenly they are test driving a brand new, beautiful SUV with a sticker price of $40,000. The salesperson is smooth. They do not talk about the $40,000. They talk about the monthly payment. They say, with your trade-in and a little money down, we can get you into this brand new car for just $700 a month. The person making $120,000 does the mental math. They think, I bring home about $7,000 a month after taxes and deductions. I can easily afford $700. If they buy it right then and there, they have just committed a massive impulse buy that will anchor their finances for half a decade. But let's say they apply the 72-hour rule. They tell the salesperson, I need 3 days to think about it. They go home. The new car smell fades from their memory. Now let's walk through the math they do over those 72 hours. They realize that a $40,000 car financed at, let's say, 7% interest over 60 months is not just $40,000. With interest, that car is going to cost them closer to $47,000 over the life of the loan. Plus, full coverage insurance on a brand new $40,000 SUV is going to run them an extra $100 a month compared to their old car. So that $700 payment is actually $800 a month out the door. Now they look at the alternative. What if they paid the $1,000 to fix their current car? Or what if they bought a reliable used sedan in cash for $15,000? If they chose the used car route and avoided that $800 monthly drain, they could take that exact same $800 and invest it into a broad market index fund. Let's look at the opportunity cost. If they invest $800 a month for those same 5 years, assuming a conservative 7% average annual return, they would have over $57,000 in liquid growing wealth at the end of the term. If they buy the new SUV, after 5 years, they own a 5-year-old car that has depreciated and is maybe worth $18,000. The difference in their net worth between those two choices is nearly $40,000. All decided in one afternoon at a dealership. When you take 72 hours to map out the real numbers, the emotional pull of the shiny new object starts to look a lot less attractive compared to the security and freedom of having an extra $57,000 in the bank. This brings up another major psychological hurdle we have to talk about: social comparison and status pressure. A huge driver of lifestyle creep is the invisible pressure to match the spending habits of the people around us. According to data from the Federal Reserve, a significant portion of consumer debt is tied to auto loans and credit cards used to maintain a certain standard of living. If your peers, your coworkers, or your neighbors are all driving nice cars, taking expensive vacations, and wearing expensive clothes, your baseline for what feels normal starts to shift. You start to feel like you are falling behind if you are not doing those things too. This is the comfort trap. We buy things to signal to others and to ourselves that we are successful. But the irony is that spending money to look wealthy is the fastest way to actually destroy your wealth. I want to challenge another piece of traditional advice here. You will often hear financial gurus yell about cutting out your daily coffee. They say if you just stop buying a $5 latte every day, you will be a millionaire. This is mathematically technically true over a very, very long time horizon, but practically, it is terrible advice for most people, because it focuses your energy on the wrong variables. Restricting tiny joys out of your life leads to frugal burnout. It makes budgeting feel like a punishment. The 72-hour rule is not about punishing yourself or never having anything nice. It is about prioritizing. It is about realizing that getting the big structural purchases right matters infinitely more than skipping a coffee. If you keep your housing costs reasonable and you drive an affordable car and you avoid high-interest consumer debt, you can buy a $5 coffee every single day and still build incredible wealth. Let's look at one more scenario to see how this plays out for someone with a variable income, because this is where the psychology of money gets really tricky. Imagine a freelancer or a small business owner. Let's say they typically make around $80,000 a year. But this year, things click. They land a few massive contracts, and suddenly their business brings in $150,000. This is a phenomenal achievement, but it is also a massive danger zone. When you have a sudden spike in income, the temptation to immediately reward yourself is overwhelming. They look at that extra $70,000 in revenue and think, I deserve a reward. I'm going to take a $20,000 owner's draw, go on a luxury 2-week vacation to Europe, and finally buy that designer watch I've always wanted. If they act on that impulse, they are treating a good year like it is their new permanent baseline. But let's say they use the 72-hour rule. They sit on the idea for 3 days, and they start to look at their business metrics and realize that next year is not guaranteed. The economy could shift. A major client could leave. They start to analyze the alternative choice. What if, instead of pulling that $20,000 out for lifestyle inflation, they reinvested it? They could use $10,000 to hire a virtual assistant for the year, freeing up 15 hours of their own time every week to focus on sales. They could take the other $10,000 and put it into an emergency business runway fund, giving them 6 months of operating expenses in cash. Let's walk through the outcome of that choice. By hiring the assistant, they use those 15 extra hours a week to land 2 more long-term clients, permanently increasing their baseline revenue by $30,000 a year. And by having that cash buffer, when a slow month inevitably hits the following year, they do not panic. They do not take on bad debt. They just ride it out calmly. The $20,000 luxury vacation would have given them 2 weeks of great memories and a watch that tells the same time as their phone. The $20,000 reinvestment permanently changed the trajectory and the stress levels of their entire career. This is what the 72-hour rule forces you to see. It forces you to step out of the present moment and have a conversation with your future self. It makes you recognize that every dollar you earn has multiple potential futures, and you are the one who gets to assign its destiny. A lot of financial struggle is not a math problem. It is an emotional regulation problem. We buy things because we are stressed, because we are bored, because we feel insecure, or because we feel like we are owed a reward. And marketers know this. Every app, every store, every website is meticulously designed to remove friction from the buying process. One-click checkout, buy now, pay later. Apple Pay. They want the distance between your impulse and your money to be literally 0 seconds. By implementing a strict 72-hour waiting period for significant purchases, you are artificially reintroducing friction into a frictionless world. You are building a moat around your wealth. Now, you might relate to this feeling of being constantly tested by your own income. You might be realizing right now that the reason your savings haven't grown in 3 years isn't because you aren't making enough, but because every time you make more, your lifestyle quietly expands to consume it. If that is you, I want you to try this rule starting today. Pick a number. Let's say $100. For the next month, anytime you want to buy something over $100 that is not groceries or a basic utility, write it down in the Notes app on your phone. Put the date and the time next to it, and then close the app and walk away. I can almost guarantee you that when you look at that list 3 days later, you will cross off at least half of the items. The urge will be completely gone. You will look at the item and think, why did I even want that? And the money you save from those deleted impulses is the exact money you need to break out of your financial plateau. You take that saved money and you automate it. You set up an automatic transfer so that money moves straight into your investment account or your high-yield savings before you even have a chance to look at it. You start paying your future self first instead of paying the car dealership, the landlord, or the credit card company. Hitting your financial goals, whether it is your first $100,000 or becoming completely debt-free, is rarely about one massive windfall. It is about 1,000 tiny, boring decisions made correctly over time. It is about realizing that true financial freedom is not the ability to buy whatever you want. True financial freedom is having the agency to choose what you actually value and having the discipline to ignore the rest. I would love to hear where you are currently at in your financial journey. Are you dealing with lifestyle creep right now? Drop a comment below and let me know what your biggest temptation is when your income goes up. If you found value in this breakdown, leaving a like really helps the channel, and subscribing means you will not miss the next deep dive. Keep your expenses grounded, protect your future choices, and I will see you in the next one.